So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at the Tableau navigation and try to really get a feel for exactly how to use the software, what the basic building blocks of the software are, so that as we start to build our visualizations and build our dashboards eventually, we'll really have a base knowledge as to what all of the elements are on the screen, what everything really essentially means, and how Tableau can really start helping us manipulate our data in a very visual way. So once you've got the Tableau program open, the first thing that you're going to see is a page that looks a little bit something like this. You may have nothing here, or you may have different previous files that you've maybe taken a look at. That's going to vary from user to user, but the things that's really important to see here are actually in this blue area. So this blue sidebar. This is where we're going to tell Tableau what data set we actually want to take a look at, because unless we connect the data or upload the data really into Tableau, there's nothing that Tableau can do with it. So we've got to tell Tableau essentially what to do. A couple of other things here. First, we've got this little button here. This allows us to kind of go back and forth between that start page and the actual workspace page. And this is the workspace page. So this is where you're going to ultimately build your data set. But we can see here, I haven't connected any data yet, so there's not really much that we can do. So if I want to go back to that start page, I just click on that little Tableau logo, which is a bunch of, excuse me, plus and minus signs. Now, before I actually go ahead and connect our sample data set, you will see a number of sample workbooks that everyone's going to have preloaded. So we're just going to take a look at one of those. So I'm just going to click on that one that says Superstore here. Double click it. It'll be executing the query. So it's just loading the data and everything. And so we can see here, ultimately, this is going to be something similar to what you will ultimately build. Is we've got a number of dashboards here. So dashboards actually have the ability to bring in more than one visualization. So we can see here that we've actually got 3 different visualizations that are represented on this one page. And it looks like they've got several different dashboards here, based on what it is, what story they want to tell with the data. So this is just an example of some of the things ultimately that Tableau can do. And we can see that we're changing, let me go back to this one. We can see that we're doing things like changing colors and chart types and, gradients and all sorts of great stuff. Now, this one that says performance, this is actually one single visualization. So ultimately what might happen is we're going to build a visualization and then theoretically bring that into another one of the dashboards. And the way that you can tell the difference between a dashboard and the visualization itself is the dashboards are represented with kind of like that 4 square icon when the visualizations actually aren't. So this commission models one, this is another dashboard, and we can see that it looks like we've got 4 different visualizations here that are combining together to create that dashboard. Same thing with this order detail, which actually looks like it's just a single visualization that they've brought into one page. And then again, we've got these other visualizations in these other tabs that are certainly of interest. But let's go back. So I just toggled back to the Tableau logo, and we want to go back into this particular view. So what we want to do here is we're going to use the sample data set that's included in your Google Drive link. So make sure that you're using the data set that says sample data. And then, as you move on, you can use the actual first round competition data. But, oops, I didn't mean to click that, sorry. So first thing we need to know is we need to connect to its file, right? So what file type are we actually connecting to? Now, as you get more in depth with this, again, probably beyond the scope of this competition, but as you get more in depth with this, you might want to connect to different types of data sets. The two that I want you to be aware of at the moment are Microsoft Excel and the text file. So the sample data set that we're using is actually going to be a text file. It's a CSV file. So if you look at the extension on it, it's CSV, which stands for comma separated value. Now, if you've got, let's say, numbers on the Mac or Microsoft Excel, you can open the CSV files in those programs. But in and of itself, it actually is a text file. It's not a Microsoft Excel file. So if I were to click on this text file, and I'm going to just navigate to where I have everything for the competition saved. So I've got it in the Google Drive here. We can see that as I'm in this window, right, because I've clicked text file, I can actually only connect to the one file that's here. And if you look, I actually have the data set for the first round here, but that one is the Excel file. So that one I actually can't connect to because I've clicked the text file. So because I've clicked text file, it actually makes it really easy for us and tells us exactly what we can connect to. I'm going to hit cancel for a second because I want to go into the Microsoft Excel file as well. So we're going to try now to connect to the Microsoft Excel file, and I just have to navigate back here. And so now, because I've chosen Microsoft Excel, that CSV file is not available to me to connect, but that first round data set is. So just make sure if something isn't quite working correctly for you, make sure that you've clicked on the correct data type that you want to connect to. The reason why we didn't do an Excel file or a CSV file for both, really the CSV file is the better one for data, but there's several tabs of data included in the first round data set. And unfortunately, the CSV file format does not allow us to have those multiple tabs. So rather than give you 6 or 7 different files that you would have to then connect and join together in Tableau, it was easier, I thought, to just do the one file with multiple tabs. So just be aware of that. That's why we have the difference there. So let's go back and connect to that sample data set. And unfortunately, it never saves my requests. So I have to always navigate all the way back. So just bear with me here for a second while I do that. Okay, so we're going to connect to that practice data set. So here we go. And once that loads, and I'm going to actually make this screen a little bit bigger there so that we can have more room here. Once we actually connect to our data set, now we have, we're in this data source section. And so this data source section or tab is actually letting us preview the data. So this is really a representation of exactly what is included in this data set. So if you were to open the data set on its own, in, let's say, Microsoft Excel, you would see that there are a number of columns across the top, and each column has a different field name with all of the data kind of flowing underneath it. And so what we can see here in this fields area, basically what this is doing is it's taking all of those field header names, so everything that's included in that first row of the data set, and saying, okay, this is exactly what's included in this data set. And it's also predicting what kind of data Tableau believes is actually included within that area. So we can see where it says type here, and we've got a number of different icons here that are represented by this. So just a little bit about what these icons mean. So the first one, we've got sale date. So we've got this icon here. It looks like a calendar. So that's indicating that Tableau believes that this is a date type of a date data piece, really, essentially. So that field includes dates or some portion of a date. So it could be a weekday name, it could be a year, it could be the actual date in and of itself. So Tableau is saying, we think this is a date. Under order ID, if you were to open the data set, and again, we can see here some actual data preview versus just the field names. These do appear to be numbers. So Tableau is saying, yep, I think that's a number. And so that's where you're seeing, or an integer, that's where you're seeing that hashtag or pound sign or number symbol. So that's indicating to you as the user that Tableau believes that the order ID is in fact a number. Same thing with the number of items. Again, we can just take a look across and that makes sense. Payment method has this ABC. So that's a string file, which really just means text. And so again, if we look at this payment method area, it's got the word credit card, it could have cash, it could have check in there. But we can see that, yeah, that really is actually just text. So then we've got the date again, and then we have under ship city, ship state, ship country, we've got this little globe. And so that's indicating to us that that is a geographic data piece. And so if we go over to ship city, ship state, and ship country, we see that we've got cities, we've got states or provinces if we're in Canada, and we've got the country. And so, yes, you could be fooled into saying, well, isn't that just text? Why doesn't that have the ABC as payment method did? You wouldn't be wrong on that. It is in fact text, but it's a specific type of text that actually indicates something geographic, just like a zip code is a special kind of number, essentially, although really it's counted as text as well. But they are numbers that represent something special. Like, for example, you're not going to add and subtract a zip code, so you're not going to have it behave in that way. And so if we scroll down, we can see that really that covers those 4 different data types really cover all of the data that we are going to have in our data set. The other thing that you really want to do too is just take a look at it, eyeball it, make sure that everything that Tableau is predicting actually matches up. And in our case, it does. Sale date is a date, order ID is a number, and so on and so forth. And everything does look correct. You'll see that we do have some things that are null here. That means it's blank in our data set, and we can deal with that shortly. But everything looks pretty decent. Now, the other thing that you'll notice, maybe, I personally don't like the color choices Tableau makes. I think they're too close to each other, but let's take a look at the order ID and the number of items here. And if you look at those symbols that I've highlighted with my cursor, if you look really, really closely, you'll see that the order ID hash mark is blue and the number of items hash mark is green. And so what's really happening there is that Tableau is predicting that the order ID, even though it's made up of numbers, doesn't actually behave as a number. It's actually what we would call a dimension. And so a dimension is going to be something that we really don't do calculations on. And so, and that would be actually true, because when it comes to a database, there's something called a primary key, which is really the unique identifier, which is what the order number is going to be. I'm not going to say, hey, what's the average order ID, right? That's not a calculation I'm going to do. I'm not going to say, let's add up all of the order IDs. I might count the order IDs and see how many there actually are, but I'm not going to do any kind of actual numerical manipulation on it, versus something like the number of items in the sale here that I actually might want to do some numerical or mathematical manipulation on. I might be interested in the total sum of the number of items that were sold, or the average number of items that went to a particular state, or something to that effect. And so those would be called measures. So the green icons indicate the measures that you would do calculations on, and the blue icons indicate dimensions. And that's why we have, like, for example, the sale date is in blue. We've got the text all in blue, and then we have the geographic icons in blue as well. So that's the difference between the colors. So there is some actual kind of method to the madness there. Now, another thing, excuse me, that I want you to take note of as we're looking at this data, if we look at, for example, the ship city, we've got a lot of capitalization issues going on in here, right? So, for example, we've got Winter Garden, Florida. Winter Garden is all in capitalization, right? And then we've got Dearborn, Michigan, in proper case. And if we scroll through, we might find some that are all in lowercase. Here's a Winter Garden that's all in lowercase, for example. If we go through Philadelphia, we might find I personally always have a problem spelling Albuquerque correctly. And here's two Albuquerques actually together, and I don't even know if they're both spelled correctly. But these were entered by individuals, right? So there can be spelling errors. There can be, for example, Philadelphia. Someone might type in Philadelphia, another person might type in Philly, right? And that could cause a problem for us as we're doing visualizations later on, because Tableau is really smart, but it's not so smart that it doesn't guess that your capitalization doesn't necessarily matter as much to you. So for example, for these two Albuquerques that are here, if I were to bring that into a visualization, it's actually going to count if I say, hey, I want to know the number of orders that went to Albuquerque, right? It's going to actually give me, in this case, two different Albuquerques, and it's not going to add them together. So we're going to have to pay attention to that a little bit later on. We're not going to do it for this particular video, but that is something that I want you to be aware of, because that is something that could potentially happen with your data. And I purposely left it in this sample data set here, this practice data set, because I wanted you to see it. So you have to be really, really careful with that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that we can't overcome it. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to take that data that we've now connected, and we're going to go to our worksheet. So if you had already opened up the one of the sample projects, you may not have as clean a view here. So just to make it a little bit simpler, what I would do is I would pause the video, close out your Tableau workbook completely, open it back up again from scratch, and connect the data set again. That way you don't have all of those tabs and dashboards pre-populated from the original sample workbook. There is a way to clear that that we will talk about a little bit later, but for right now, just close it out and start it again. And it's a great way to practice connecting that data set. So if you need to do that, pause, come back when you're done and restart. If you're already cleared out, great. We want to go to our worksheet, nicely highlighted here for us in orange, or we could click on that Tableau logo, but we're going to just click on sheet 1 here, which brings us to a very blank looking sheet. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing here on our screen. Okay, so before we start the fun stuff and we start pulling in data points into our workspace, I think it's really important to understand all of the elements of the workspace. So there's a couple of things that we want to actually note here. So first, I haven't actually titled this workbook at all yet, but once I save it with a name, the name of the entire workbook, so the entire file, will appear in this area up here. Again, if you have, I'm working on a Mac, so if you have a Windows machine, it might appear like here a little bit. So it is dependent in some ways on the operating system that you've got. But we also have what we call cards and shelves. So the cards are going to be these little square areas. So you can see we've got pages, we've got filters, and then our shelves are our rows and columns. And this is how we're actually ultimately going to start adding data to our view and then to start manipulating that data. We've also got the toolbar, just like we would in, Microsoft Office or something like that. So these are going to contain a number of important shortcuts for us, or some manipulation pieces. So this one kind of looks like the slideshow in PowerPoint, for example. We can add sheets, we can, save, we can go back, all sorts of great stuff that we can do with that. The next thing that we've got is our view, which is actually this large blank space right now. It won't be blank for long, but it will be for right now. And this is really our canvas. This is really the place where we start creating that visualization, and we can kind of see it start to take shape and what it will look like. Remember, we do have this Tableau icon over here, and that helps us go back to that start page. So we'll just do that where we can connect our data again. So we're going to go, we can just flip back and forth between those if we really want to. The next thing we've got is our sidebar, and this contains our data pane and our analytics pane. So here we're in the data pane. We've also got an analytics page, which doesn't really do anything for us just yet, but the data pane actually shows, again, all of those column headers, all of those field names. And remember, we had them organized by field type. So again, we've got our text, we've got our calendars, we've got our global geographic items, then we had all of our numbers. And remember, we also had the two colors. We had the green for the measures and the blue for the dimensions. And here Tableau is actually making it a little bit easier for us to tell the difference between the green and the blue. All of our dimensions, which are in blue, are at the top part of the data pane, and all of our measures are actually going to be on the bottom part. And so we've got them nicely broken into by that separator area. So if you're like me and you have trouble telling the difference between which one's green and which one's blue, I wish they used like red and blue. But if you're like me and you can't really tell the difference unless you're like really up close to it squinting, that will also help you, just like it helps me. The next thing that we have is a little area right here, this data source page, right, the little button here. That one will actually let us go and view our data. So let's just click that for a second. That takes us to that preview page that we had right after we connected our data. So if we're not really sure, like let's say, for example, like I mentioned, we might have a problem with some of the capitalization on the city names. If we're like, hey, why is Philadelphia or Albuquerque or whatever it was showing up twice, we could go back and look at that particular, line in the data and be like, oh, I see what the issue is. And so then we might have to clean that up a little bit if we need to. Then we've got our status bar, which our status bar right now is blank because we've got nothing here, but it's actually going to give us information about our current view. And so I'll point that out once we start bringing some data in here. And then of course we've got our sheet tabs here on the bottom. So right now we've only got one sheet, but if you recall, when we opened up that sample data workbook, there was a number of sheets, there was a number of dashboards. I can certainly add another sheet here if I want, just that plus area. I can also Command Z to undo anything that I did, or Control Z if I'm on a Windows machine. I can add a dashboard, which you will do at some point. You can also add stories, which we'll talk about as well in a future tutorial. So that's just a little bit about the navigation piece of Tableau. And so hopefully that helps you kind of understand exactly what we're dealing with and what this really all represents. So what we're going to do in our next tutorial is actually start bringing over some data and actually working with Tableau to create a meaningful worksheet.